Hey guys, it's Ryan. Thanks for tuning into Theology-ish. Before we jump in, I just want to emphasize that the discussions on this podcast are exploratory in nature and delve into a variety of theological perspectives. They do not strictly represent or define our personal stances on the faith, nor the doctrine of our affiliated churches. We encourage listeners to reflect, question, and seek guidance from their local church leaders. Our goal is to foster understanding and curiosity. We ask that you listen with a humble and discerning mind. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to Theology-ish, your favorite podcast for all things pertaining to theology and that happen to be theology adjacent, such as biblical studies, philosophy, church history, etc., etc. I am one of your hosts, William Berry, and with me today, as always, is my co-host, Ryan Kelly.
How's it going?
Oh, it's pretty good, man. How's it going with you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
Just a very busy few weeks since the last time we sat down to record. A lot going on right now.
Yeah, but it's been good, though.
Yeah, it's been good.
Busy but good. Good.
Yeah, there's good busy and there's bad busy, and it's been pretty good busy.
All right.
Yeah, anything new with you?
No.
Oh, okay.
How about you? Anything new going on?
No, not particularly.
Well, all right then.
Yeah. Well, what are we talking about today, William?
Well, today we are going to be talking about the mid-20th century theologian, author, and church leader, Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Well, theologian might be a strong word.
I think he probably counts as a theologian.
Yeah, maybe. I've only read so much of his stuff, and insofar as the stuff by him that I have read, it hasn't been theological, quote unquote, in nature. It's been very much more, this is how you guys ought to do this thing. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Exegete, perhaps.
Yeah, he leans definitely more into exegesis, I think, generally.
Yeah, but I've heard him called a theologian more than once.
He counts as a theologian.
Close enough, at
Yeah,
least.
if you look at his Wikipedia page, it says he's a theologian.
Well,
So,
I've actually got that pulled up.
oh, all right.
So we're going to be using that just for some footnotes here to talk about his life and his history, because it's just the most accessible line of text that tells me his life story. We're just going to use that as kind of footnotes and then talk about him, some of the stuff he wrote, the events surrounding him, that kind of thing.
This is the utmost level of scholarly rigor you can expect here from us at Theology-ish.
Yeah.
Wikipedia.
But hey, you were right, though, because the opening line to his Wikipedia page is that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German Lutheran pastor, theologian, and anti-Nazi dissident who was a key founding member of the Confessing Church. Now, there's a lot to unpack there.
See, I knew that he's called a theologian on his Wikipedia page because I knew we were talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer today, and I needed to brush up on his history, so I looked at the Wikipedia page earlier today.
Oh, man, it's like you said, only the most in-depth
most
research.
Scholarly rigor and in-depth, peer-reviewed academic sources do we engage with here.
Yeah. But yeah, so Dietrich Bonhoeffer is, by all accounts, considered to be one of the more faithful, perhaps, and certainly more well-written church leaders and theologians from the 20th century, right up there with C.S. Lewis and a few others. Really, really good stuff. As I mentioned there, though, and not everyone knows this, is that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a part of the Lutheran Church and was, in fact, a Lutheran pastor. Now, you don't necessarily get that just from reading through some of his works, at least not the ones that I've read in recent times. It's not super obvious that he's Lutheran necessarily.
So he doesn't constantly talk about how great Luther is and how much he loves Martin Luther and how you should love Martin Luther. He's not constantly prattling on about the Augsburg Confession.
He sure isn't, no.
right.
Again, at least the things by him that I've read, I've only read a few. So he wrote a lot of stuff, shockingly, like more than I realized.
Yeah, and
I haven't read most of it yet.
He died when he was, 39?
Something like that. We'll have to we'll have to get there.
Very prolific author for someone that, I was going to say passed away so early, but he didn't so much passed away as he was hung until dead by Nazis.
Yeah, and
Sorry,
that's the
spoiler there.
That's the other thing, is that he is one of the better known martyrs of recent times in the modern period, so to speak. Every once in a while we hear these stories about, missionaries out in third world countries or out in sub-Saharan Africa or in these little island nations who end up getting killed by like cannibals or something. You hear that sometimes in even more recent times than this, but Dietrich Bonhoeffer is probably the most well-known, I want to say, martyrs of recent years.
It's weird. World War II was like almost 100 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's almost been it's almost been a century. But yes, he's definitely one of the better known martyrs of the past.
I'm just going to shout this out because I absolutely love this. And I know he doesn't listen to this podcast, so I doubt this is going to get around to him. But there is a fellow in my church congregation by the name of Mr. Charlie. And Mr. Charlie is a World War II veteran. How old is he? 101, going on 102. His health has sort of declined in recent years, unfortunately. He's stuck to a wheelchair now and some other stuff going on. Pray for Mr. Charlie, if you could. He is one of the nicest men I've ever met. He is just a joy to speak to and be around. But yeah, he was a World War II veteran, which is super cool.
Do you happen to know if he fought in the Western Front or Pacific Theater? Or
I don't know, unfortunately. I need to talk to his family and get some more info about like what specifically he did, because I'd love to hear more about his story. No, I just wanted to shout out Mr. Charlie because I love Mr. Charlie and it's great to have him around.
I used to go to church with a World War II veteran whose name was Mr. Richard Arnold, and he wrote a book about his experience in the war.
Okay.
It was called Dig and Dig Deep. Because when he went over there to fight in Germany, he had been given advice by his cousin who had already fought. And his cousin was like, hey, when you get out there, the first thing you do is dig a foxhole.
Yeah.
So he did. That was the first thing he did, was dig a foxhole. And out of however many thousands of American troops that fought at that battle, he was one of like 24 that survived.
Wow.
It was absolute slaughter.
Man.
So he saw some things.
Yeah.
But yeah, look up Dig and Dig Deep by Richard Arnold. You can still find copies of it on Amazon, and it's a good little read.
I'll have to look into that.
Less than 100 pages, short read, but
I'll have to do that.
It's a good story. Anyway,
that's a lot of stuff about not Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
But it is about World War II, kind of, which is relevant.
Yeah, but let's not start at the war, because that's actually sort of towards the latter part of his life. Let's instead start with the fact that he was Lutheran. So what do you know about the Lutheran denomination? I mean, do you happen to know when it was started, why it was started, what some of their core beliefs are? I am not super familiar with the Lutherans myself, so.
I'm not super well-versed either. I believe it started in 1517-ish, thereabouts, where Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the church door there in Germany. And he says, hey, here's 95 things about the Catholic Church, or as they called it at the time, church, that I think are wrong. And the Catholics said, hey, what if you were a heretic and weren't allowed to come to church anymore? And Luther said, hey, if that's how you think, then fine. I don't want to hang out with you anyway.
Yeah,
And then now we have Lutherans.
And if you recall our first ever episode where we talk church history for a while too, you might recall that Luther doing all of that led to Zwingli, and then Zwingli led to the Baptist movement and gave birth to that. So that's why we have Baptist churches as well.
Calvin admired Luther, and Calvin started the Presbyterians, who I believe they become Methodists eventually.
Really?
Yeah,
Huh.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, Calvin starts the Presbyterian Church, the Methodists grow out of the Presbyterian Church, and then the Church of God, which is the tradition that I come out of, grew out of the Methodist Church. So
Okay.
I'm
And then eventually people take some stuff John Calvin said more or less out of context, slap his name on it, and then start their own denomination.
How out of context it is, because it's just Calvin starts his thing in Geneva,
Yeah.
and the things that he says that are lovely and pastoral and a little bit more mediated, the following generation from him takes some of those things and
Yeah.
they're no longer quite so pastoral and mediated, and they become 5-point Calvinism, which is now what the Presbyterians believe. But that has little to nothing to do with Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
No, but he was a Lutheran, though.
He was a Lutheran.
So, Catholic without the Pope, basically. I mean, to some extent.
As far as I understand it, they differ in praxis from the Catholics, but not so much in doctrine. So they have a slightly different ecclesiology, and they don't have saints that they venerate in the same way the Catholics do.
I do know that they do hold to some more of the sacraments, the holy sacraments that the Catholics also hold to in regards to stuff like paedobaptism.
Do they have all 7 sacraments?
I'm not 100% sure. I just know that's more of a thing there than it is for, say, the Baptists, like my church and various others. One of their core beliefs also is transubstantiation. And to the best of my memory, he doesn't mention that in any of the readings that I've read from him, but I do know that he does talk about it in some of his works, and that he does in fact believe in transubstantiation.
Yeah,
so
I
that's
think you have to as a Lutheran.
Yeah, well,
I think. I don't know.
have to is a strong word,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's a core Lutheran belief. So that's the church tradition that Bonhoeffer was a pastor at.
Yeah, and I believe that. So Lutherans are also really big on like the priesthood of the laity.
Yeah.
Which is that we all have equal access to the power and authority of God through the Holy Spirit, and the priests are not the special, as it were.
Which I can get down with that line of thought.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. I've been thinking and reading a lot about the values of hierarchy, especially strict hierarchies and monarchy and whatnot. And I don't know. I'm still thinking through that.
That's a topic for another day.
Yes, it is. Which has nothing to do with Bonhoeffer.
We're saying that a lot. We should probably get into like Bonhoeffer.
You had any good grilled cheeses lately?
No, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I had a grilled cheese the other day that was really good, which has nothing to do with Bonhoeffer, but I digress.
Yeah, so anyway, I guess my one sort of, I don't know if warning is the right word, but my one note for this episode.
Caveat.
Yeah, would be just because Bonhoeffer, man, I'm getting my words mixed up. Just because Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran doesn't mean that you should take what he says and say, oh, well, he was Lutheran, so that's bad, or that you shouldn't pay attention to it, or that the things that he did weren't good.
Are there people that are bagging on Bonhoeffer for being Lutheran?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Really?
I mean, you could look it up and you can find, 30 different articles talking about why Bonhoeffer was a damnable heretic and wasn't a saved Christian because either he's Lutheran or because of his specific beliefs.
Well, dang.
To be fair,
harsh.
you can find that about any public figure.
They let anyone talk on the internet. Just look at us. But
Yeah, so that's not a Bonhoeffer specific thing, but I just want to say for us that are Protestants, or even if you're Catholic, if you're not Protestant, don't assume that just because he's Lutheran, that means that everything he says is wrong, and that just because he thinks something differently than you do means that the stuff he did or the stuff he said wasn't valuable to us today in spite of that. Bonhoeffer, as a Lutheran, held some beliefs that I don't really agree with myself. But I also am open to the fact that he was a very faithful man of God and did some incredible work in the name of Christ. And he wrote some really good stuff.
And he fought Nazis.
Yeah, and there's nothing cooler than fighting Nazis.
So if you ever are talking to some sort of uncharitable atheist type who's like, the Christians were on board with Hitler during the Holocaust, punch him in the mouth and talk to them about Bonhoeffer as you get them some ice for that busted lip.
Yeah, we're going to get into that here in a little bit as we go through his history. He was openly and very publicly anti-Nazi.
Which, if you don't know much about Nazi Germany, that was a dangerous thing to do in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, and I think we'll see that as we get towards the end of this episode. But let's talk Bonhoeffer's history. Let's talk about his life and that.
All right.
So,
teach me about Bonhoeffer.
Well, as Wikipedia puts it, Bonhoeffer was born on the 4th of February in 1906 in Breslau, which was at the time Germany, but is now part of modern-day Poland. So, technically he's German, but technically he's Polish? I don't know.
Well,
German.
He was German at the time.
Yeah.
Germany took part of Poland.
Yes.
And then Poland took part of Germany back when all was said and done.
Yeah.
So,
but Breslau was in Germany at the time and is now part of modern-day Poland. And was born into a large family, including a twin sister named Sabine Bonhoeffer, who were the 6th and 7th children of the 8 in their family.
Was he 6 or 7?
It doesn't say, so I'm not 100% sure.
All right, then.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
His father, Karl Bonhoeffer, was a psychiatrist and neurologist, and was noted for his criticism of Sigmund Freud.
Which, to be fair, there's a lot to criticize there.
There sure is.
Freud was insane.
Yes.
Did you know that Freud did, so much cocaine?
Really?
Yeah.
I knew he was kind of nuts. I didn't know he did cocaine.
Shlomo Freud, because his middle name was Shlomo.
Oh.
He was Jewish. That's neither here nor there. But he did a lot of cocaine.
Good for Sigmund Freud.
Anyway.
Yeah. So I guess Dietrich's father did not much care for him. And his mother, Paula Bonhoeffer, was a teacher and the granddaughter of a Protestant theologian named Karl von Hesse, and a painter.
How do you spell that?
Karl, Karl von Hesse, Hase.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's his family, that's his parents and what they did. His father was a very well-educated man.
So you could say that Bonhoeffer was coming out of an educated family?
Yes.
A very well-educated family.
Yes, and you'll see why that's important as we get on here.
Of diverse interests and understandings, no doubt. Because
yeah.
Anyway.
Now, when Bonhoeffer was 8 years old, he learned to play the piano. And what's cool about that is that by the age of 11, he was performing songs at the Philharmonic, which is really impressive.
That is impressive.
As a musician, to learn piano at 8 years old, play for 2 years, and then start playing at the Philharmonic, that's impressive. He must have been a pretty dang good pianist.
I can play the harmonica.
Can you?
Not well. It just sounds like free her, free her, free her. But that's my harmonica impression.
Wow.
But good for Bonhoeffer.
Yeah, so he was apparently a very skilled pianist.
All right.
Which is kind of cool. One of his older brothers.
Say he was a musical genius, maybe?
Maybe. Now, this is an interesting fact about his family that is important for a couple of reasons. One of his older brothers, Walter Bonhoeffer, who was the second born in the family, was killed in action during World War I when Dietrich was 12 years old. So Dietrich lived through World Wars I and II. Well, he didn't live through the second one, but we'll get there.
He almost made it.
He was so close.
So close.
Yeah, but the second-born child amongst his siblings was killed during World War I when he was 12 years old.
Do we have any information about where his older brother was fighting when he was killed?
No, I don't have that specifically pulled up. Like I said, these are kind of just footnotes.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to dig into, because Hitler was also I'm assuming that he fought for Germany because he was a German.
I don't know.
And Hitler was also a World War I veteran for the German army.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to dig into that and see if Walter Bonhoeffer and Hitler ever crossed paths.
I hope not.
Oh, yeah. Me too.
Well,
anyway.
Now, at age 14, Bonhoeffer decides to do something that will forever change history. Do you know what that thing is, William?
No, I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, at age 14, Bonhoeffer decided to pursue his education in theology, despite the criticism of his older brothers Klaus, who was a lawyer, and Karl, who was a scientist. So, 14 years old, and Dietrich starts pursuing theology.
Do they let 14-year-olds do that? Like,
apparently.
Seems a little young, but all right. Good for him.
Is anyone ever too young to start doing theology, William?
Babies.
Touché.
Babies can't do theology because they can't talk. They don't understand words.
That's fair enough. Well, yeah, so 14 is when Bonhoeffer starts digging into theology. And that's really important because that ends up shaping literally the rest of his life and the direction that he takes it.
It's a big decision to make when you're 14.
No kidding. I mean, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure that the average life expectancy back then was as good as it is today.
I mean, it wasn't too bad
I don't know.
at that point in history. We had antibiotics by then, so...
Fair enough.
You were less likely to get killed from a stubbed toe by this point in history.
Yeah, so at 14 years old, he decided to take Hebrew as an elective in school and attended a bunch of evangelical meetings, quote, moved by the many sufferings that resulted from war, such as hungry and orphaned children.
When I was 14, I played Skyrim one day for approximately 14 hours, and after doing that, I realized I had not eaten or drank anything all day because I had been playing Skyrim for 14 hours, so I went upstairs and made a ham sandwich. So, two paths diverge in the woods. One of them is learning Hebrew, and the other is playing Skyrim for 14 hours.
Yeah, so that's what Bonhoeffer does at 14 years old, which is really weird to think about because, man, when I was 14, I wish I could go back and slap myself in the face and go learn Greek. Go do that.
Are you learning Greek now, Ryan?
No, and I really should be.
If you fast forward to yourself like 8 years in the future, do you think that 8 years in the future you will be upset with modern you for not learning Greek now?
Probably. Anyway, he starts getting into that. And at that point, he begins his studies at Tübingen. Tübingen.
Übingen?
Übingen? I don't know.
Tübingen?
And then eventually moved to the University of Berlin, where he submitted his successful dissertation, Sanctorum Communo, at the age of 21 on the 17th of December.
Like his doctoral dissertation?
Yes, at the age of 21.
That's dang.
On the 17th of December, 1927, he went on to complete his doctorate of theology degree from Humboldt University of Berlin, graduating summa cum laude.
I feel dumb.
He was 21.
I feel dumb.
He was about 2 years younger than I am now, and he had finished his doctorate summa cum laude from Humboldt University of Berlin.
He also knew Hebrew. Dang it. I feel dumb.
So
That's
what we're getting at is that he was a very well-educated individual.
Not only was he well educated, he was probably almost certainly smarter than you. He's definitely smarter than me. So when he says stuff, you should listen to old Dietrich.
Yeah. So fast forward a few years, and in 1930, Bonhoeffer moved to America with the interest of attaining a Sloan Fellowship at New York City's Union Theological Seminary. And I find this hilarious. Bonhoeffer was, quote, greatly unimpressed with American theology.
And, that's fair.
He described the students as lacking interest in theology and would, quote, laugh out loud when learning a passage from Luther's Sin and Forgiveness.
And, that would definitely tick off Bonhoeffer because he's,
a Lutheran.
a Lutheran.
Yeah, that would do it. Yep, so while he was there, he met Frank Fisher, a black fellow seminarian who introduced him to the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, where Bonhoeffer taught Sunday school and formed a lifelong love for the African American church.
So, see, Baptists and Lutherans can get along. You can be friends.
We can all be buddies.
You can hang out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at that.
Yeah.
Look at denominational divides.
Yeah, and
keeping people apart.
While he was there doing that, he also heard Adam Clayton Powell Sr. preach the gospel of social justice and, quote, became sensitive to the social injustices experienced by ethnic minorities in the U.S., as well as the ineptitude of churches to bring about integration.
Okay.
In other words, he didn't care for racism.
I'm going to keep it real with you.
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure who that dude was.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know either.
I was wondering if he was like a major,
Let's click his link and find out.
Civil rights dude that I should know about.
Adam Clayton Powell Sr. was an American pastor who developed the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York, as the largest Protestant congregation in the country with 10,000 members. He was an African-American community advocate, author, and the father of Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Born into poverty in Southwest Virginia, he put himself through school and Wayland Seminary, where he was ordained in 1892.
So, influential American pastor from
Yes.
roughly this time period.
Yeah, so he heard that,
right.
and then Bonhoeffer decided, I don't much care for racist people.
Good for Bonhoeffer.
That's going to be really important here pretty soon.
My dear listeners, if you didn't know this, racism is bad. Don't be racist.
Yeah, so that happened. We're going to skip ahead a little bit past that stuff. Basically, he just preaches in America for a while and does his best to integrate colored people into church because that's what you ought to do. Later, he became involved with the ecumenical Christian movement, which eventually led him to the resistance of Hitler and the Nazis.
Yeah, screw those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't like them.
Hitler was bad.
Yeah, so that's where we're at right now, right? He's in America.
Where he learned that racism is wrong.
Yes, in the 1930s. He's preaching and he's doing his best to stop racism and generally just being a pretty cool dude. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, you and I know this, but Bonhoeffer doesn't stay in America.
It's true. And
He doesn't stay there.
It makes me sad to think about because he left Germany just in time for things to not be Nazified. And then he goes back after it's Nazified, which is sad.
As sad as it is, it's a good thing. And you'll see that it's a good thing.
In the grand scheme of things, yes.
He was doing the Lord's work. So, in 1931, he returned to Germany and became a lecturer in systematic theology at the University of Berlin. What do you know?
That's in Germany.
Full circle. So he goes back and starts teaching systematic theology at the University of Berlin and was deeply interested in ecumenism? Ecumenism? Ecumenism. Yeah, that's the one. Ecumenism. We're going to skirt past that because...
It's the role and functions of the church.
Yeah. And eventually, he was appointed by the World Alliance for Promoting International Friendship throughout the churches, a forerunner of the World Council of Churches, as one of its 3 European youth secretaries. At the time, he seems to have undergone a personal conversion, as he changed from being a theologian primarily attracted to the intellectual side of Christianity to being a dedicated man of personal faith, resolved to literally carry out the teachings of Christ revealed in the Gospels.
Do you think that's a fair characterization of Bonhoeffer?
I think so.
That he wasn't always like deeply personally impassioned and engaged, and he just thought of theology as like a fun intellectual thing, or
probably.
You think?
And I think the whole Nazification thing played into that.
Yeah, that'll give you a kick in the seat of your pants and make you really evaluate things in a different way.
Yeah. So then in November of 1931, at the age of 25, he was ordained at Old Prussian United St. Matthew in Berlin. So he was ordained at 25 years old in a different denomination. So that's cool.
I feel like a failure.
Yeah.
Comparatively.
Now, this is where we get into something interesting. Do you know what church group Bonhoeffer was a founding member of?
It's like the starts with a C. The Confessing Church?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The Confessing Church.
Yeah, so that starts a... Because the Lutherans, if I'm recalling correctly, as the national denomination of Germany, kind of had an option of either affirming Hitler and the Nazi stuff or getting dead. So they ended up kind of affirming Hitler and the Nazi stuff. And those that didn't ended up getting dead and being replaced by people that did. So Bonhoeffer was like, well, if you guys are going to be into Nazis, I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah. So, in the words of Wikipedia, Bonhoeffer's promising academic and ecclesiastical career was dramatically knocked off course by the Nazi ascent to power on the 30th of January in 1933. He was a determined opponent of the regime from its first days. 2 days. Only 2 days after Hitler was installed as chancellor, Bonhoeffer delivered a radio address in which he attacked Hitler and warned Germany against slipping into an idolatrous cult of the Führer, aka leader, who could very well turn out to be Wehrführer, aka misleader or seducer.
That would never happen.
No.
Interestingly,
though, do you know what happens during that radio broadcast?
Oh, he gets cut off.
Yes.
They turn him off the air.
So his broadcast was abruptly cut off, and to this day, it has not been confirmed whether or not it was the Nazis who cut him off, or if it was just radio interference, or something happened. We're not 100% sure, but it was probably the Nazis.
It was probably the Nazis.
Yeah, so 2 days. This was 2 days after Hitler came to power, and he's already speaking out against Hitler.
So again,
publicly.
When you have a friend or a coworker who's a jaded atheist and they're like, Christians supported Hitler, or Hitler was a Christian or whatever, again, punch them in the face.
Maybe don't do that.
No?
Because punching people in the face is a bad idea.
Okay, well,
don't
technically
do that.
it's a crime and also just mean. So don't punch them, but make them read Bonhoeffer's Wikipedia page, because there were no shortage of Christians in Germany that were like, hey, this Nazi stuff sucks.
Yeah, and we see more of this too because, let's see, in April of 1933, Bonhoeffer raised his first voice for church resistance to Hitler's persecution of Jews, declaring that the church must not simply, quote, bandage the victims under the wheel, but jam a spoke in the wheel itself.
Which is so cool sounding.
Right?
It's so cool.
So what he's basically done is 2 days after Hitler comes to power, he's publicly saying, hey, maybe don't listen to this guy. He gets cut off. And then shortly thereafter starts addressing the church and pleading for them to not just help the Jews when they're already down on their luck, but in his own words, jam a spoke in the wheel itself. Let's do something about it.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
Yeah. So after that, we're going to skip here a little bit. In 1932, basically the long and short of it is the German government forces on the church a new vote for leadership. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was very adamant that his church fellows vote for not Nazi-affiliated church leaders.
Which is a reasonable request,
Yes,
to be sure.
But unfortunately, his cries fell mostly on deaf ears as numerous Nazi-affiliated church leaders were appointed at the time.
If the votes were actually carried out in good faith, it's entirely possible that they were installed as sympathetic figureheads that
it's also
really get
worth
elected.
noting that these church votes that they forced onto the church, Hitler specifically did this, by the way. This was something Hitler did. And according to Wikipedia, he did so unconstitutionally as well. So not only did he force them to do this, he did so illegally, which is not outside the character for Hitler.
It's like, God, geez, just when you think Hitler's can't get any worse, he violates constitutional rights, man.
Yeah, in the words of this, in July of that year, an overwhelming number of key church positions went to Nazi-supported people, which is bad. So that happens, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that.
Ah, man, that sucks. Yeah, I mean, here I go sounding Catholic again, but if it were Catholic churches, he couldn't be like, hey, you guys need to vote new people in to lead, because that's not how it's done for them.
Yeah.
That if you oust your priest at the Catholic Church, at your local Catholic diocese, you just don't have a priest anymore.
Yeah. Now, it's also worth mentioning, up to this point, Dietrich Bonhoeffer has written numerous books already. We haven't mentioned any of them, but he's written numerous books at this point as well. So on top of all of his crazy young age that he got his degrees and doctorates at, that he was ordained, that he started preaching numerous times, he moved countries. In the midst of all that, he still found time to write numerous books.
Why haven't you written any books, Ryan?
Because I'm bad at it. And I'm willing to admit that.
Fair enough.
I am not a well-written author, unfortunately. But yeah, so he's written numerous books at this point. He has not yet written his most famous books. Those are yet to come. And we're going to get into those in a little bit. So Nazis take over the church, basically, and that's a big kerfuffle.
Womp womp.
So in opposition to Nazification, Bonhoeffer urged for an interdict. Interdict? Yeah. Interdict.
That's how you pronounce that.
An interdict to stop offering all pastoral ceremonial services, which include baptisms, confirmations, weddings, funerals, and otherwise.
Yeah, so he's calling the clergy to go on strike, basically.
Yeah, he's basically saying, hey, until we get these Nazis out of here, we're not going to do pastor things. However, Karl Barth, who was a church leader at the time as well, amongst some others, advised against such, quote, radical propositions.
And Barth, he's also a majorly influential theologian from the mid-20th century.
Yes, and I'd love to talk about him sometime too.
Yeah,
Yeah, so Karl Barth didn't much care for that idea. He thought that was not the right approach. Bonhoeffer thought it was a good idea. It is what it is.
Barth and Bonhoeffer got into a fist fight.
No,
that didn't happen.
No, so as much as we talk about Bonhoeffer fighting Nazis, believe it or not, he never actually fights Nazis.
I mean, that we have historical records of.
We'll get to that, though. So basically, he and Hermann Sasse,
Saucy Herman.
yeah. Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Saucy Herman were deputized by opposition church leaders to draft the Bethel Confession as a new statement of faith in opposition to the Dutch Christian movement. Notable for affirming God's fidelity to Jews as his chosen people, the Bethel Confession was eventually so watered down to make it more palatable that ultimately Bonhoeffer refused to sign it.
Imagine writing something about how Christians ought to be, and then an editor getting a hold of it and ruining it so much that you're like, you killed it.
Yeah.
I want no part of this anymore.
How sad is that?
Yeah. It makes me wonder what the OG version looked like. I wonder if we could get that.
Well,
maybe. I don't know. Anyway.
We've got less time than I thought we did already. We've got like 20 minutes left.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, this is flying. So we're going to skip ahead here a little bit. All I'm going to say about this part of his life is basically he goes back to London. So he goes from Germany to America, back to Germany during Nazi leadership, and then leaves for London also in the midst of Nazi leadership.
So he gets out, right? He manages to avoid the Nazis, right?
Yeah.
Bonhoeffer's going to be okay?
No. So even as this puts it here, he didn't go to London to escape the Nazism of Germany. He goes there to preach, because of course he does. And basically he just, he gets appointed as a 2-year German Lutheran priest, more or less. And preaches for a couple of years. In the words of Wikipedia, Bonhoeffer, however, did not go to England simply to avoid trouble at home. He hoped to put the ecumenical movement to work in the interest of the confessing church. So basically, he wanted to spread his church group that he had started.
Yeah, he wanted to spread it and get some support from churches there in the England.
Yeah, so this is where stuff gets interesting. Because we're finally at the part of Bonhoeffer's life where he starts fighting some freaking Nazis.
Heck yeah.
So in 1935, Bonhoeffer was offered a coveted opportunity to study nonviolent resistance under Gandhi in his ashram. Gandhi wanted to teach Bonhoeffer. How neat is that?
I mean, I'm not a super big fan of Gandhi.
I mean, no,
personally,
but it's interesting.
It's interesting. I presume that Bonhoeffer does not take the internship.
Well, he was offered, but however, remembering Barth's rebuke, so call back to Barth there, he decided to return to Germany instead. So, brother is born in Germany, leaves for America, comes back to Germany, leaves for London, and then instead of going to meet Gandhi, goes back to Germany again.
Which was admittedly a better use of his time.
It was.
I have negative things to say about Gandhi, but we can talk about that some other time.
Yeah, so he returns to Germany and was then appointed the head of an underground seminary in Finkenwadel.
Can you read that location name for me again?
Finkenwadel.
Finkenwadel.
Finkenwadel. For
Which is a silly
training
name for a
confessing church pastors. So at this point, there's a lot of, shall we say, religious persecution happening in Germany.
I think it would be fair to say Germany's full Nazi at this point.
Yeah, and so he can no longer be an openly preaching pastor like he was several years ago because it's worse than it was then. And now he has to lead an underground seminary.
Do you think they actually did it underground, or was it just like
That would be
secret?
pretty cool.
Did they do it in like, I don't know, basements or something?
Maybe. So it talks a little bit about how in order to support this, he had to acquire funds and had some very wealthy benefactors who supported his seminary, including a woman by the name of Ruth von Kleist-Retzvow. What a name.
Was she German? It sounds like a German name.
Let's check.
I mean,
real quick.
I was joking. I'm
I don't know.
reasonably sure that she had to be German.
Yes, German nobility, in fact.
Yeah, she had to be German with a name like that.
Was born into German nobility and married a Prussian army family. Into a Prussian army family.
Of course.
Yes. So yeah, he had some wealthy benefactors who were supporting him in his underground church, basically. Which is cool. So he goes around doing that for a while. Now, in 1937, Gestapo, whoever that is.
It's the secret police.
Yes. Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
I knew
Gestapo.
that. Yeah.
The Gestapo.
I knew that. Yeah, the Gestapo closed the seminary in Finkenwadel. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And by November, arrested 27 pastors and former students of that seminary.
That's unfortunate.
Now, it was around this time that Bonhoeffer published his best-known book, The Cost of Discipleship, a study on the Sermon on the Mount in which he not only attacked, quote, cheap grace as a cover for ethical laxity against the values of, quote, costly grace. So The Cost of Discipleship is certainly Bonhoeffer's most well-known work. I just finished it not that long ago myself. It's very good.
Yeah, I read it earlier this year.
It's incredible, I would even go as far to say. One of the better reads I've given my time to in recent years. I very much enjoyed it. And I would highly suggest to anyone to pick it up and read it. It's got some really good stuff. He spends a bit of it talking about, this is what it means to be a disciple, and these are the consequences of that. And basically, life's going to suck, but hey, do it anyway.
And he speaks from a place of personal experience.
Yeah, and it's a deeply convicting book. It's super convicting.
Yeah, it's very challenging.
There were times that I was sitting there reading and I was just like, oh man, I suck.
Dang it.
Man.
Here I go sinning again.
Yeah, it's around this same time that he also publishes Life Together. I'm not 100% sure if that was before or after The Cost of Discipleship, but it's roughly around the same time while he's in Germany there. I know specifically Life Together he wrote while he was living in basically a secret Jewish camp hiding from Nazis. And the sense of community amongst the Jewish people there within inspired him to write that book. It's a much shorter book. It's like 80 pages or something. It's super short, really easy read. And it's just a really nice little book about doing life together as fellows in Christ and how that ought to look. And it's really good, so I suggest reading that also. You can find most of his stuff for pretty cheap. It's all very widely available. That's all we're going to talk about his writings for today, because we don't have a ton of time, and I'd like to do dedicated episodes to some of those writings at some point.
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
So yeah, just know that he wrote those while in Germany, preaching while running from the Germans.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
there's a certain authentic authority that comes from writing something about the cost of being faithful to Christ, while it's costing you something to be faithful to Christ.
Yeah. So he publishes those books, and then roughly for the next 2 years, he is secretly traveling from one Eastern German village to another to conduct a, quote, seminary on the run, supervising the continuing education and work of his students, most of whom were working illegally in small parishes within the old Prussian ecclesiastical province of Pomerania. So at this point, he's just kind of going place to place, spreading the word of Jesus as best as he can, while also not getting arrested by Nazis.
Which was a hard thing to do at that point in German history.
Yeah, it wasn't that easy.
They liked arresting people.
Now, in 1938, the Gestapo banned Bonhoeffer from Berlin. They outright said, "You're not welcome here anymore."
You ever been banned from anywhere, Ryan?
No, I haven't.
Oh, all right.
Have you?
I'm not going to talk about that.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. And in the summer of 1939, the seminary was unable to move to Sigurdshof. I'm so sorry about these pronunciations.
You know, here's an idea.
Sigurdshof.
Perhaps you should just say a town.
Yes, an outlying estate of the von Kleist family in a place. And in March 1940, the Gestapo shut down the underground seminary there following the outbreak of World War II. So World War II has officially begun. Bonhoeffer has been formally banned from Berlin, and his underground seminary has been eradicated by the German Nazi leadership. So that's really unfortunate. Okay, yeah, so it's then that he publishes Life Together.
Okay.
Because it's at that point he's living with some Jewish people who are on the run.
All right. So,
yeah. Now, you might think that that might be where it ends, that he's just stuck in Germany because World War II's broken out, and eventually the Nazis catch up and kill him, right?
You might think that.
No. Can you guess where Bonhoeffer goes next?
Canada.
Back to the USA.
South Canada.
He's gone back to America.
And then he stays in America, right? And he stays safe from the Nazis, right? That's what happens, right, Ryan?
Sure. Now, I'm going to skim over this a little bit, but long story short, his brother-in-law, who was a member of the German resistance, ropes Dietrich Bonhoeffer in to an underground spy coup seeking to overthrow Hitler from leadership.
And for those of our listeners that might not know this, Ryan and I are actually brothers-in-law. So,
yeah.
Ryan, if someone were to take over the government and be a Nazi, and you were to be a part of an underground spy ring that has an intention of assassinating said person, can you do me a favor and not rope me into it?
I don't know.
Can you do that for me?
I can try.
Don't rope me into your assassination plots.
I will do my best.
And I won't rope you into my assassination plots. And
that's fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, although it doesn't necessarily say it's an assassination plot specifically.
So
what it says is that their plan was to overthrow Hitler.
My understanding of it is that Dietrich Bonhoeffer's brother-in-law is part of this plan. Their plan is to assassinate Hitler and to perform a coup. And he mentions Bonhoeffer in his journal. And it's unclear, as far as I understand it, whether or not how much Dietrich Bonhoeffer was involved in the actual planning. But because he's mentioned in his brother-in-law's journal, when they find it, they're like, yes, of course.
Yeah.
So then he gets in trouble for that.
Well, anyway, yeah, so he gets roped into a spy plot to overthrow and potentially assassinate Hitler.
As one does.
Yeah. So that was in 1939, which is when he's back in America at the invitation of the Union Theological Seminary in New York. Now, after spending a little time there, he actually writes to the seminary and has something to say to them. Do you know what that thing was, William?
The Union Theological Seminary?
Yeah. Because they were the ones who invited him back to America. That's why he's in America right now.
You guys suck. I'm out.
No. I'm going to read this whole quote that he wrote to them because this is great. I have come to the conclusion that I have made a mistake in coming to America this time. I must live through this difficult period in our national history along with the people of Germany. I have no right to participate in the reconstruction of Christian life in Germany after the war if I do not share the trials of this time with my people. Christians in Germany will have to face the terrible alternative of either willing to defeat. I can't read. Christians in Germany will have to face the terrible alternative of either willing the defeat of their nation in order that the future of Christian civilization may survive, or else willing the victory of their nation and thereby destroying our civilization and any true Christianity. I know which of these alternatives I must choose, but I cannot make that choice from a place of security. So what does he do, William?
He goes back to Germany.
He goes back to Germany in 1940.
Which is a bad time to go to Germany.
Yeah. So at this point, he's been in Germany, left it, been back in Germany, left it, been back in Germany, left it, and now he's back in Germany again. He's back in Germany again, man.
And if I recall correctly, this is where he stays.
This is for the last time. Finally, he will remain in Germany. So, to make a very long story short, he goes about doing his Nazi spy antics and attempts to overthrow the Nazi government and Hitler.
Does it work?
Unfortunately, no. The Nazis catch on to them.
Dang.
Yeah, it's a shame. But they got caught up too. And on April 5th of 1943, both Bonhoeffer and another leader of his coup, by the name of Donanyi, I think, were both arrested and imprisoned. This is 1943, okay? So we've got 2-ish years before the end of the war, right?
Yep.
So over the next 2.5 years, Bonhoeffer remains in prison-ish, somewhere in that time frame, 2-ish years. He remains in prison and eventually gets sent to a concentration camp.
Which is worse than prison.
Yes.
From my understanding of things.
Yeah, so he gets sent to Flossenburg concentration camp in 1945, the 8th of April, 1945. And this will be where he spends the rest of his life.
And while he's in prison, he's not entirely idle. He writes a number of letters that are available to read that you can find, and they are beautiful and tragic and challenging to the faithful and worth reading. So I encourage you to seek those out and give them a look.
That's not all he does. Because while he's in this concentration camp awaiting execution, because he knows it's coming, while he's in this concentration camp awaiting execution, what does he do but start a church in the concentration camp?
Like you do, you know.
So he starts preaching to the other prisoners. But not just to the prisoners, but to the Nazi guards. And they get in on it. And what ends up happening is some of the guards end up secretly moving him from cell to cell, like in the midst of the nightly hours, so he could preach to the other prisoners. Some of the guards were in on it with him. They were letting him preach.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Imagine being so good at preaching that you convince Nazis to be a little bit less Nazi-ish.
Alas, it didn't end well. He was executed by hanging at the dawn of the 9th of April, 1945.
If I recall correctly, Hitler himself ordered the execution.
Yes.
and 2-3 days later,
Yeah.
he unalives himself, as
Yes.
it were. So
Sewer
Hitler,
slide.
Hitler saw what was coming down the pipe, and he said, before I die,
Kill the pastor.
kill that guy.
Yeah, so he was stripped of his clothing and led naked to the execution yard where he was hanged with 6 others. Admiral Wilhelm Canarsis, General Hans Oster, a deputy named Canaris, I believe, General Karl Sack, a military jurist, businessman Theodor Sterneck, and German resistance fighter Ludwig Gehr. A student and close friend of Bonhoeffer, whose name I won't even try to pronounce this time because I know I can't, writes of a man who saw the execution. I'm going to read this out. Quote, I saw Pastor Bonhoeffer kneeling on the floor praying fervently to God. I was most deeply moved by the way this lovable man prayed, so devout and so certain that God heard his prayer. At the place of execution, he again said a short prayer and then climbed the few steps to the gallows, brave and composed. His death ensued after a few seconds. In the almost 50 years that I worked as a doctor, I have hardly ever seen a man die so entirely submissive to the will of God. And that is the written account that we have of his execution and therefore martyrdom, making Bonhoeffer one of the more recent and notable martyrs in our history, which is really sad.
What do you think he prayed about?
I don't know. That's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to answer.
Yeah,
We have
I mean,
no idea.
Part of me wants to say that it was a prayer for the German people to do better and for the Nazi leadership to see the error of their ways and to convert. I could be totally wrong about that, but he spent so much time reaching the German people before his death willingly, despite the Nazism, that I just wonder in his final moments if that's the same thing that was running through his head. Just, man, do what you will with these Nazis, God, As goofy as that sounds, but reach them. Do your thing.
I think you're probably right. I mean, I have no evidence to back that up, and neither does anyone else. We don't know what he prayed, but I think it's in keeping with the rest of Bonhoeffer's story and life for his last moments to be prayers for Germany.
Yeah. Now, there's just a couple things to close out here about this, which is that it was very shortly after his execution that the concentration camp he was being held at was liberated.
Yeah, I mean, the war is over within... He's executed on April 9th?
Yes.
So I don't remember
the
offhand.
wiki didn't have the exact date for whatever reason.
When did Hitler get dead? It was April 30th. So not as soon after Bonhoeffer's execution as I thought it was.
Yeah. So he was executed on April 9th, right?
Yeah, and Hitler killed himself April 30th. So it was very shortly thereafter.
More notably, the concentration camp he was being held in was liberated on April 23rd. Less than 20 days after his execution.
So
it was
close.
Liberated and the prisoners were free.
He was so close.
Yeah, and that's Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his life and what he did. And the only other note to say is that we don't know where his remains are.
No?
No, so apparently the Nazis did something with his body.
Well, I have a couple guesses.
Yeah, they never found it. We don't know if they burned it or buried it and threw it in a lake. We don't know. So we do not have his remains, unfortunately. But that's Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And all I've really got to say about that is if you heard all that and got his history there, and you still think, well, he was a Lutheran, so he's a heretic and he's going to hell, I feel sorry for you. Because I'm sorry, but having read through that and heard through a lot of that, I mean, what an incredibly faithful man.
Yeah, I think if you have negative things to say about Bonhoeffer that aren't, reasonable criticisms, because anyone who writes things is going to say things that are wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk all day about transubstantiation and whether or not him believing that was wrong.
I think you are compelled to admit that at the very least he was faithful. And he tried.
And you know what? I don't have the number, so I don't know how many people his work led to conversion directly. I mean, I don't know.
It's still doing that. His writings still have impact.
But he did more in his lifetime than most of us could ever hope to do for the faith and for the church.
Heck, man, by the time he was 21, he'd done more than I've done.
Yeah, I mean, so that would just be my closing note is just, regardless if you've got issues with some of his personal beliefs, with his theology, with the Lutheran Church, it is hard to deny the faithfulness and the piousness that he had.
Yeah, and I think it would be intellectually dishonest to do so if you said things about Bonhoeffer being unorthodox or what have you. That would just be coming from a place of dishonesty and negligence on your part, because his life proves otherwise.
Yeah. So any closing thoughts? We're a few minutes over as it is. This one ran a little bit long, but any closing thoughts on Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
Oh, I don't have anything else important to add. Other than an encouragement for you, our dear listeners, to go pick up one of his books. Give it a read.
Yeah.
Look at his prison letters. Read the first chapter of The Cost of Discipleship. That's my favorite chapter in it.
It's a good chapter.
It's a very good chapter. Look at Life Together and any of his other stuff, and I'm sure it will benefit you.
Yeah, and like I said, I hope to do some dedicated episodes to some of those books in the future here and talk about them specifically and what he had to say, because as awesome and as cool as it was to talk about him and the stuff he did and him himself, what I think is also cool is the stuff he wrote and what specifically he had to say. So we'll do that sometime.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Tune in next week for our very special Halloween episode.
Ooh, spooky.
It's going to be spooky. It'll be a good time.
The pandering. Like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah.
Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you leave a review talking about the podcast, we will read your review on the podcast.
Ooh.
And then, if your review is positive, then we will thank you for the kind words. And if your review is negative, we will tell you why you can shove it.
Yeah, and if you're Canada Man from last episode,
Canada Man,
you still haven't emailed us. I'm waiting.
Belgium guy.
Yeah, Belgium dude.
Belgium dude and Denmark. Well, Denmark dude and Belgium bro.
Yeah, but Canada Man, we specifically shouted you out last time. Email us, leave a comment, bro. Come on, let's talk.
To know, I need to know where all of you came from, because I don't know. How did you find?
Anyway, we're running long. We gotta go. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, leave an email, all that good stuff. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.